Good evening and welcome to Our Front Porch here at the Western Illinois Museum in Macomb, Illinois. How are you tonight, Larry?
I'm all right.
Great.
Been a long, busy day.
A great historic day.
Yes, ma'am.
And we also have a new guest tonight. Hello, Nick. How are you?
Great.
Good. All right. Well, Happy New Year to all of you and happy Inauguration Day, right? Larry, we're starting to get some regulars on this. So a little shout out to some of our regulars. Hi, Mary. Hi, Candy. Hi, Jeff. Randy and Tabby are out there. And maybe there's some new people joining us tonight. We use the comments section to say where you're from and introduce yourself if you like, because there's no strangers on Our Front Porch. So, a historic day. We inaugurated a new president, the 46th, yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Another historic event, our first female person of color as a vice president, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But there's something else this week that happened, I think, that we need to celebrate, that needs to be acknowledged, and that would be that Larry had a birthday.
Yes, I did.
So,
205th birthday.
200, as we do on Our Front Porch, Larry. We have to celebrate. That's what we do. So let's see what we got here for you. Oh my gosh, look at this. All right. There you go. Take that off there and see what you got.
That's one thing that's going to spring out and scare
This is
me.
not going to scare you. At least my cooking shouldn't scare anybody. I don't know, maybe
Oh,
it
look
does.
at that.
Look at that.
Oh,
Look at
with candles and all.
So
Wow.
no blowing out, right? No blowing. So
You can't turn them on because the sprinklers will come on.
happy birthday,
Thank
Larry.
you very much.
Happy birthday,
Got
Larry.
you a
Thank you
pot
very
on Our Front Porch, so. All right, now we got that all cleared up, right?
Yes.
All right, so thank you, Larry, for being our facilitator, and thanks to the WIU History Department and Political Science Department for being our partner on this. And we also have to thank the Illinois Humanities Council for their COVID relief grant that helps us put on these programs and figure out all this brave new world here. So thanks to all those people. So Larry, you're a facilitator, and as we say, Larry's in charge, right? That's how this works.
It's the only
You
place.
got that, Nick?
I hear you.
Okay. All right, so if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the section below and put that in there, and I'll be monitoring those and feeding them to our gentleman here on Our Front Porch. We have a couple people in-house, thank goodness. We can have some people in the building, so we will also take questions from our in-person audience. We ask for everybody's welcome, but we ask for a civil discourse. It's the spirit of the day, it seems to be, right?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so you two are going to be around till 8:30, and we'll see what kind of conversation we get into. So I guess we're ready to go.
Okay. Thank you, Sue.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go any further, I witnessed the events of today, and I was telling Nick that it was maybe the best inaugural speech I've heard. And I'm not a big fan of Lady Gaga, but she was great today, as was the poet. So it was a very interesting, entertaining day. It was kind of optimistic day. Well, tonight our topic is Russia, Putin, and the United States. And our expert tonight is my oldest friend here in Macomb, Nick Pano, a founding member of the History Department for more than 20 years, the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Charlene and I are his daughter's godparents. Nick was my tour guide.
That's how I got on.
When I came here to interview in 1967, Nick was my tour guide. So we're old, we go back a long way. He is also a world-level expert in Russia and Eastern Europe. He's been to Russia several times, and so he's the best expert I know on this tangled topic, which is somewhat murky and sometimes subtle obvious. So it should be an entertaining and interesting evening, and don't hold back on your questions. Welcome, Nick. Would you like to start with a comment or reference?
Yes. I'm going to begin by going through a couple of the handouts, and those of you at home will see these particular items that I'll be referring to from the handout. There's an old expression in Russia. Russia is not a land, it's a world. Russia is not a country, it's a world. And that becomes very apparent when we take a look at some of these maps that I have of Russia. And when we talk about the geography and size of Russia, and some developments in the near past, these geographical elements become very important. And I'd like to begin, first of all, with the topographical map. And if you look at this topographical map, and I'm not sure how clearly you're able to see it, but one of the things that's apparent about Russia is that this country is essentially a flatland. And on one of my trips to Russia, I had the opportunity to ride the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And if you ride that railroad, it's a 7-day trip, but the way we did it was we rode halfway east, then flew to Vladivostok, and then coming back, we left Vladivostok and stopped at Irkutsk, and we went by train from Vladivostok to Irkutsk, and then flew to Moscow. But one of the things that's striking, Russia is a great flatland. You will see forests, but mostly flatland, grassy areas, and the few mountains that are in Russia, the ones that are significant, are all on the periphery of Russia. They're all on the southern regions of Russia. And some of those countries are not part of Russia today. The only major obstacle is the Ural Mountains, which you can, I hope, see on this map. And the Ural Mountains are not really high mountains, and they don't afford too much protection. So one of the themes in Russian history, one of the underlying themes, is that Russia has been subject to hordes of invaders from the east and from the west. And this has made the Russians, over the course of their history, security conscious, very security conscious. Russia also, because of this geographical fact, has been involved in a number of major conflicts throughout history. So first of all, Russia is a great plain. It has been a highway and byway of movement of populations from east to west and west to east, mostly in the guise of invaders. So the Russians have been very leery. We might say they are very protection conscious. Then I have two additional maps. There is one, Russia in 1950, and one in 1959, and 1991. Now, the map of 1950 essentially is what Russia had become by the beginning of the middle of the 17th century. There were some further incursions in the southern part of Russia, but Russia had basically completed its expansion. And as it emerged, Russia was, certainly by the 17th century as it is today, the largest country in the world. But then in 1991, the Russian state, the Union at that time of Soviet Socialist Republics, broke down. There was an internal period of unrest, and Russia was reduced in size. And you can get some view of that from this map, Russia in 1991. But to make it a little more concrete, what I've done is provide some comparative data. Russia in 1990, Russia in 2019, no, I'm sorry, that should have been, Russia in 1991, and the United States in 2019. We can use the we can use the 219 because of the population data. But the important thing to keep in mind, look at Russia in 1990. It's 8.65 million square miles. The Russian Federation in 2019, 6,700,000 square miles. What has happened? Russia has lost, as you can see, a tremendous amount of its population, of its land area. Same thing with population. Its population in 1990 was 291 million. Today it's 142 million. But a very interesting development because of the changes that took place following the breakdown of the Soviet Union. All of the non-Russian republics, be they the Baltic states, or be they Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or Armenia, all of these non-Russian areas were no longer part of the Russian state. And so the Russian population is just about halved, but the percentage of Russians in that state has gone up from 51% to 80%. And so we can see some very significant developments that have taken place here. Size of Russia greatly reduced, its population reduced. Russia, which was the largest country in the world, however, still is the largest country in the world. We have seen the domestic, gross domestic production decline, and that reflects, of course, this change in the the gross domestic production, despite the size reduction, has grown over this period of time. The Russian army, and again, the gross national production is very important because this is one of the indicators of Russian strength, whether or not, and one of the questions we'll talk about is, can we still consider Russia a great or a superpower? And we've seen the Russian armed forces, they have declined significantly in size from 2.6 million active troops in 1990 to 1.1 million active troops in 2019. And then I've also got some information there about the comparative size of Russia and the United States. We have 3.8 million square miles, roughly a little more than half the size of Russia. Our population now 333 million compared to the 142 million Russians. And as you can see, our gross domestic product, $21.4 billion to the Russians, 4.4 trillion. And I've got some comparative data there for military budgets, 65.1 billion for Russia, 693 billion for the United States. But the Russians are devoting 3.9% of their budget to military activities, and we are devoting 3.4%. So these are some very significant changes. When we look at this lineup, Russia versus the United States, we see that the United States, despite the fact that we are the world's leading superpower, if not the only power, still are going to be facing some very significant competition from Russia. I also have another document which pertains also to our topic, and that is a timeline which deals with the rise of Vladimir Putin. But before we get into a discussion of Putin and Russia and the United States, I did want to call your attention to two other lists that I have. I have a list of films dealing with Russia, some classic film, beginning with the battleship Potemkin all the way down to a 1997 film called Brother, which deals with the corruption in present-day Russia. And then I also have a series of books, beginning with William Appleman Williams' American-Russian Relations, 1781 to 1947, because our relations with Russia go back to 1781, when we sent our first diplomatic mission over there. We did not recognize Russia formally until 1803, And in 1809, we sent our first minister to Russia, who happened to be our 6th president, John Quincy Adams, who went on to great things. And I have a very important book, if you're interested in Russian culture, Olanda Feige's Natasha's Dance, A Cultural History of Russia, and then a number of books dealing with contemporary developments in Russia. And one of these is written by a familiar name. If you watch the impeachment hearings, Fiona Hill is one of the co-authors with Clifford Giddy, Mr. Putin, operative in the Kremlin. And there's a very good book, if you just want to read one book on Russia, short book, 215 pages of text, covers 1,200 years of Russian history, but a really great book, Mark Galeotti's A Short History of Russia.
Before we go on to Putin, let's go back and look at Russia for a minute. Would it be fair to say that while Russia is smaller in territory, it's more homogeneous now than it was under the Soviet Union?
Right?
Does that mean it's stronger or weaker?
It's stronger in certain respects. I mean, it's not having some of the difficulties with the non-Russian people. There are still non-Russian population groups within the country, such as the Chechens, who have been very
A lot
of trouble for the Russians and some of the other groups. But I think the ethnic homogeneity, which is not complete, but 80% now, is a stabilizing factor as far as the nation is concerned.
Is Russia an Asian nation or a European nation?
I think most Russians would insist, and I think they're right. Russia is a European nation. It's always looked to Europe. And beginning with the rise of Moscow and the Moscow princes and boyars who became czars, they turned to the West. And then you think of such outstanding personalities as Peter the Great, Catherine the Great. They all looked to Russia, Alexander I. And then in the 19th century, you had two groups of Russians, the Slavophiles and the Westernizers. The Slavophiles were strong Russian nationalists, but the Westernizers, again, looked to Western culture, Western Europe, for their literary inspiration and also for their intellectual and moral satisfaction.
And the Romanovs, the Russian royal family for the last 300 years of their existence before the revolution, were intermarried with the royal family from Western Europe as well.
Oh, yes.
Willie Nicky, the letters between.
Right, the Royal House of Denmark, German family. I mean, that was one of the problems with the Sud-Est Alexander.
Yeah. So, was Russia's size, and is Russia's size, a handicap? Or is it an advantage?
Well, it's a challenge, I'll put it that way. Because you had to build roads, railroads, to try to keep this country together. You've had to use at times coercive means. You've always had to have what we call a coercive compliance structure, because you conquered a lot of these people. And a lot of these people still maintained their languages, they still maintained their religions. Russia was an Orthodox country, but you had Buddhists, you had Muslims, you had Taoists, you had all kinds of religious groups. So it was a kind of a challenge to keep this country together.
Russia has a vast area. Is most of it useful? I mean, is it land you can grow things on? Is it land that you can use for industrial production?
Russia has some mineral products. Right now, Russia is living off its gas and oil resources. In fact, about 60% of Russia's exports are the gas and the oil. So they live and die by that. But farmland is somewhat scarce now because the Ukraine was the breadbasket of Russia. Now, new lands were being opened up. And even under the communist regime, they wanted to open up these regions in Kazakhstan. It was Khrushchev's virgin land policy, which was not entirely successful, and that's one of the things that got into trouble. So feeding Russia, again, is somewhat of a challenge.
I think I read somewhere that Russia covers 11 time zones.
Correct.
There's 24 time zones, right? Isn't that right?
I think,
about half of the time zones in the world, right?
Right. Well, as I say, it's a 6,000 miles from east to west.
Yeah. One final question on Russia before we get into more specifics, or open up for questions here. When I read Russian history, and I haven't read a lot of it recently, I always get the feeling, at least in the 17th and 18th and 19th century, that Russia always felt itself at risk or under potential siege or attack from somebody. And that put them in a kind of, what I want to say, cover-up mentality or mentality that are always looking, afraid they were going to be affronted or left out of something. Is that a fair statement about Russia?
Well, the Russians had a very bad experience. Their experience has been of constant wars. And first ones, of course, the first challenges came from the east, the Mongols, and Russia was under the Mongol domination for 240 years, which is the age of the United States. And then finally, they were able to get rid of the Mongols and go on the offensive in the east. But in the west, they were constantly fighting wars. One of the films I have on there is Alexander Nevsky, which deals with the invasion of the Teutonic Knights in the 13th century.
Like Lavaca?
No, like Pipers.
Pipers, I'm
Like
sorry.
Pipers.
Yeah. I mean, I know that this feeling exists, but is it permeating through Russian society? Does the average Russian think in these terms, for example? When they see a crisis or a potential crisis, they always think that they're being put upon by somebody or they're being unfairly threatened or unfairly singled out. Are Russians really aware of their history?
Yes.
More than
and more so now, because one of the things that Putin has tried to do is to recreate history and to accentuate these threats historically, whether it be the Swedes, with Peter the Great from 1700 to 1722 defeated. Then there were the Poles. Then there were the French. Napoleon came in 1812. Then the Germans in World War I, the Germans in World War II.
Yes.
And these things now, more and more, are being accentuated. And then, as he feels some grievances toward the United States and the West is a threat, not only militarily, but economically and also culturally. I mean, so he is playing into these fears. There's an old saying in Russia that the present is certain, but it's the past that's unpredictable because history is constantly changing. Yeah.
Any questions, Sue, from the outlying districts or
Just-
anybody here?
They're learning a lot, they're telling
Okay.
me.
Didn't the Vikings at one time invade part of Russia?
Yes,
Or
Yes.
9th and 10th century.
Get up some of the rivers and all that, the same
Yes,
thing they
yes.
were doing in the rest of Europe?
That's why you see so many blue-eyed Russians.
Is that where it comes from?
Yeah.
And most of those particular Vikings were from what we now know today as Sweden.
Yeah, they're the closest ones.
Sue?
Anybody else in the audience have a question? Oh, let's see, there's something coming in. Hold on. What do you think will be the fate of, I'm not going to be able to say, Navalin? Is that?
Man who's arrested?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Nick, answer that.
we have two questions regarding that.
I think we have another one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, he is probably one of
Pronounce the name.
Yeah.
Pronounce it.
Navalny, thank you.
He is one of the most popular dissident Russian figures. He has actually stood up to Putin on any number of occasions. The charges against him, I think, are rather trumped up. I mean, he's been accused this time of embezzlement. That's a popular charge against dissidents in Russia. You've got a foundation, well, you're embezzling money, you're doing this, your books are irregular. Now, he feels duty bound to go back. I mean, he has a strong sense, he knew what was going to happen to him. I think the Russians had made it very clear that if he returned to the country, he would be arrested. I don't know whether he has to be tried again or not, because these were charges, I think, that were proven at one point, and then they were put in abeyance. And so whether or not there'll be a trial, I don't know. But I think it's his determination, his strong belief that there need to be major political changes within Russia. Russia has the forms of a democracy. I mean, they have an elected legislature. There are 3 or 4 parties. Putin's party, United Russia, is the main party that usually wins. There's a party called the Liberal Democrats, which is neither liberal nor democratic. And then there's a Communist Party, which is the old Communist Party, which surprisingly enough seems to be gaining a little more of a following within Russia. Some older people are especially disenchanted with some of the things that are going on. But there have been there are periodically polls taken of attitudes on certain issues in Russia. And most of these polls show that there is a great deal of concern about the breakdown of democratic ideas in Russia, the democratic structures, and there's a feeling that there needs to be a reform, if we want to use that term, of the political system to make it more genuinely democratic. Obviously, Putin does not want that. He has taken a number of steps in this past year. In July, legislation and then a referendum made it possible for him now to run for 2 more terms. Under the Constitution, he was limited to 2 consecutive terms. In 2012, after serving his first 2 terms, he had Medvedev, one of his close associates, named president, and he became prime minister. Then he ran for 2 more terms, which expired. The second term of this second set expires in 2024. And then we had this 2020 legislation, which is going to make it possible for him to run for up to two more terms. And so people are very much concerned about those kinds of things.
Let's bring on Vladimir Putin. We'll come back to your question.
Just a follow-up question on that. How big is Navalny's following? Was just a follow-up question on that.
That's very difficult to quantify. We know when he has run for office, he ran for mayor of Moscow and came in. He came in a pretty close second, and God knows whether or not the votes were manipulated, because there's no appeal. I mean, you get the results, and that basically is it. So he does have a following, whether it's 20% of the electorate or 30%, 40%. It's, as I say, difficult to quantify.
When I see pictures of Vladimir Putin, particularly with his shirt off, posing, he reminds me of a thin Mussolini, but there's a lot more to them than that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Vladimir Putin?
Yes, I have Vladimir timeline in this handout. It's on the screen also. For one thing, a lot of people are surprised about Vladimir Putin's age. He's 68 years old. And as you say, he does like to show his strength. He is a judoist. He still engages in that sport. He rides horses. He rides, and I don't know if I brought the picture here or not. He's also he calls himself a Christian and does attend services. And if you ever want to see him in church, all you've got to do is look up Russian Orthodox liturgy, and you can see several of those which say Putin and Medvedev attend such and such a service, or Putin attends a service, and you can see him in church. But just yesterday was the Feast of the Theophany, the Feast of the Epiphany in the Orthodox Church. And one of the rituals connected with that is that priests will throw out a cross into a river or lake, and divers will jump in to retrieve the cross. It's done in January. Well, Putin did not go to a river, but he went to a special font in the shape of a cross and dunked himself 3 times in temperature of 7 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, he proves his virility.
See, a comment, he was in his real workaday life before his political, he was a functionary of the Communist Party, the secret police, was he not?
Oh, yes, he was, it's funny, he came from a very poor family in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg again, and he was not a communist. Apparently his parents were not communists, but he did well enough in school to get into the University of Leningrad University at that time, went into the secret police, went to Germany, East Germany, served 5 years there, and married before he went, and he had a flunky job from everything I've been able to read about him. He had a flunky job, and I'm just going off my sheet here, and stayed there until 1991. That's when Eastern Europe was rising up against communism. Went back to Leningrad, and there he went to work at the university, managed to land a job of pro-rector, which is like a a chancellor, for external affairs, which must have been rather interesting. And then he became associated with this Anatol Sobchak, who was the mayor of Leningrad, and that was his career. He was off to the races, got a responsible job after job, and then became a deputy mayor. He then went to Moscow, where he got into the presidential administration, again doing primarily administrative work, supervising sort of like a general services administration in Washington, all the equipment and stuff that belonged to the state. And then spent a year as the head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. And then from there, he went to becoming the deputy mayor of Moscow, the deputy mayor of Moscow, and from there on, he's rapidly moving up the hierarchy.
Is he a gifted politician? Was he just lucky? Is he ruthless? I mean, probably all of those.
Well, first of all, he's efficient. He's competent. He had a lot of these administrative jobs, and he handled them well, and he got good reports from his superiors. He was also a good communist. So, I mean, he was reliable, and so bit by bit, he is moving up in the hierarchy. Now, this is a very interesting period in Russia, because it's the 90s. Russia is changing. The Union of Soviet Republic is, old Soviet Russia is gone. And now all of these changes are occurring. He now comes to the attention of Boris Yeltsin, who now becomes the president. When the Soviet Union broke up, all the republics became basically independent. The Russian Federation, which is Russia today, is the biggest, and he's now Yeltsin's boy. Again, he does a good job for Yeltsin, but Yeltsin was having a bad time in the 50s, drinking a lot. He came to the United States on a mission, president of Russia, 1995. He was caught on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington in his pajamas, looking for a pizza joint at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And these are the kinds of things that were getting him in trouble. He slept through a big meeting in Ireland on a official trip there to do some serious business. And so he had to go. He understood that himself. and he appointed Putin as prime minister, then acting president. This is all within a year. And what he does is to set Putin up to run for the presidency of the Russian Federation. And Putin is elected in 2000, and we are now in the beginning of the Putin era. I will say one thing to give you some idea of Putin. There are people saying he's kind of an SOB. He is and he isn't, because one of the things he did, he made it possible for Yeltsin to remain in the Soviet Union. He did what Trump did. He granted him a pardon and his family a pardon from any kind of state action. And since he was now the big guy in the Federation, he was able to carry that out.
So did he undermine Yeltsin? Or did
Yeltsin pretty much undermined himself.
Yeah. So we'll pause for a question.
Yep. Okay. Jeff asks, I was in Russia during 2016. Our guy predicted the results of the United Russian Communists and Liberals. It turned out exactly as he predicted. Someone, as we know, might say that sounds rigged.
Pardon me?
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
I was in Russia during 2016 election. Our guy predicted the results for United Russia, Communists and Liberals. It turned out exactly as he predicted. And then he goes on to say, as someone we might know says, that sounds rigged.
Well, I would suspect that the elections are pretty carefully planned out.
Has the United States had a record of interfering in Russian elections in the last 20 years or so?
I think we have done some work. I don't know if we've actually, it's soft interference. We have been focusing our CIA efforts, in countries that, we are really concerned about the direction, whether it's a Latin American state or one of the East European states, something going on in Montenegro where you have a pro-Russian party and a anti-Russian, we get involved in things like that. We're not into, some of these things such as in Iran or at the end of the Second World War, and the British got, most of that out of office, and we did the same thing in Guatemala. We do that, but it's not so much in Russia. But, we have people making propaganda for a certain candidate.
So if it's true that the Russians interfered or tried to interfere with the 2016 election, they're doing it, if they're doing it, for their own purposes, not as a sense of quid pro quo, what we might have done earlier today.
They're doing it. Larry, first of all, I don't think there's any question that the Russians interfered in the 2016, and they certainly were active in this election also. And essentially what they're doing, one of Putin's cardinal foreign policy objectives is to create turmoil in the Western world. I mean, they were interfering in the British and French, not so much, well, yes, Brexit, they were involved in that too, making propaganda on the side. Now, in Germany, Angela Merkel is not running for re-election, and her successor as head of the CDU, Christian Democratic Union, is a guy who is much more sympathetic to Russia than Angela was. So, I mean, and they encourage these kinds of things, but there is no question whatsoever that the Russians are intervening. That's their Putin's first concern, create turmoil domestically. His second concern, which he is pursuing also through these various kinds of programs, whether they're communications, whether they're people belonging to certain organizations and splinter organizations, such as some of these right-wing or left-wing fringe groups in countries. He is trying to break up the unity of organizations such as the European Union, creating all kinds of controversies in those organizations. And what he's hoping to accomplish by that is to weaken the Western alliance and to enhance Russia's position in the world because the West is no longer unified.
So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we have one question here. Is Putin ill? I read somewhere that he had Parkinson's.
Well, yeah, that's one of the stories. And as far as I've been able to determine, I do follow developments in various newspapers that are reliable, and I have not found anyone producing evidence that he's ill. There have also been some stories, and again, these may be planted for all we know, but that he's getting tired of ruling. He's getting to be around 70. He wants to enjoy life, and he may not run in 2024. Now, again, so you have those kinds of stories that crop up from time to time. But again, the illness has not been verified.
Does he have a logical successor?
Not that I'm aware of.
Designated somebody or no?
I don't think he's, he and Medvedev are sort of, on the, well, they're not on the real outs, but I mean, they're not close.
Okay.
Anybody here?
No, sorry, you got a question?
Well, it's borders on this. Back before the 2016 elections, would have been in the summer at some point, Donald Jr. was being interviewed by one of the networks. And I watched it on one of they had a project they were going, and the interviewer asked them about financing, family financing. And Jr. looked at him very blithely and said, "Oh, well, we get all our money from the Russians." And the interviewer kind of took a half step backward, and so did I. And they just went on to something else. I've always gotten the impression, especially with and I've heard also that the Deutsche Bank over the years has been a conduit for Russian money laundering. And they've done a lot of business. Is there any traceable link between the Russians and the Trump family? And is this why they were so kind to each other all the time?
Let me paraphrase. The question, you may not be able to hear it very well online. The question is the relationship, the monetary relationship between the Trump family and the Russians, vice versa.
That does what exists, but
Yeah.
Well, we're not sure that there's a formal relationship. Trump, former President Trump, beginning in the 1980s, 1987, and then in subsequent years made a number of trips to the Soviet, to Russia. And his interest was in trying to get some contracts to put up a hotel or other kinds of activities. His children, especially Ivanka and Jared, had been over there several times. He went over 2013 as the sponsor of a beauty pageant, and he hoped to use that to make some contacts. But as far as I'm aware, there were no real Russian investments in some of these projects he was pushing. Now, where Trump did get money from Russians was Russians who would come to the United States and buy apartments. And they, several down at the Mar-a-Lago complex, you had these Russians putting their money into those, and most of those Russians were laundering that money. These were ill-gotten gains, and that is, I think we can say that, but I don't think that Trump has ever realized what he hoped to get out of Russia in terms of investment. And as far as Deutsche Bank, yeah, it had a bad reputation of laundering money, and it now is trying to clean up its act.
it just looked on the interview when Donald Jr. naturally, that was the most natural thing in the world, and like, has anybody got a pot, you know, or something? It was just, apparently it was just a toss-off answer for him, as though everyone should know that and understand it, and it struck me as being a little odd. But that answered my question.
Is there a Russian mafia?
Oh, definitely, yes.
What's connected? Is it connected to Putin in any way, like unofficial recognition, quid pro quo?
Yeah, now when we talk about the Russian mafia, it was especially active and powerful in the 1990s. It still exists, but after the Soviet Union broke up and the communist system was abandoned, and, you had all these factories, all these businesses that came up for sale. And a lot of these mafioso types, as well as some, legitimate businessmen, came in and bought those, and they were going, for pennies on the dollar. And many of these mafiosos, not all, but some of them, as our own American mafia, have become legitimate businessmen. And so, yeah, there is, and I think the state kind of looks the other way. What the state under Putin demands in any activity, you can do it, don't be flagrant about it, but do not intervene politically. You had that case of Khodorkovsky in 2003. He was the biggest Russian businessman going, and he got active politically. And Putin made him a horrible example, sentenced him to 15 years in prison, and he got out after 10.
Is Putin personally wealthy?
Yes. He claims he makes his income tax available, which shows his salary from his government job. He has a few investments, et cetera, et cetera. It's like $158,000. Now, the estimates of his wealth run from, I think, 23 million into the billions.
So would it not be logical to assume that organized crime in Russia, allowed more or less to operate as long as they don't get out of bounds, is kicking money back to him?
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay.
I mean, I strongly suspect, I don't want to be sued by Mr.
No, sure. Well, if Vladimir Putin picks up on this program, we know we've hit the big time. One of the things I picked up in the reading, you gave me the Stent book.
Right.
Which is very good. It's dense, but it's complete. Is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it did so without a whimper almost, it's not as violent as a revolution that put them in place, that one of the things that happened was the satellite countries, Poland, Bulgaria, the Latvia, and places like that, there was a great rush to get them into NATO. Does this trigger off the kinds of fears that Putin and other Russians have about being encircled, about losing traditional role in Central Europe? Would it have been better had the Western powers simply been a little more reluctant to move in that direction?
That was one of the things that soured U.S.-Russian relations, because if you look in the 1990s, when things were an absolute mess in Russia, and even a little before, when Gorbachev, from 85, to 90, U.S.-Russian relations were pretty good. But then, in the late 90s, the early 2000s, when we started bringing these countries into NATO and trying to get them closely aligned with the European Union, at that point, the Russians became very alienated from the United States, to put it mildly. And then, of course, we had 2014, when Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president of the Ukraine, was ousted. The United States, of course, was encouraging all these dissident movements in the Ukraine. And again, what Russia was arguing was, look, you're on our turf. And Putin has this very strong sense of territory. And it's part of the same mentality that Stalin had after the end of the Second World War. All these satellites in Eastern Europe. He wanted these as buffers from the West, from Germany, from all these other kinds. The same thing with Putin. He says, look, you're right on my front porch. You put the Baltic states in. For a while, he did create some problems, especially that we're going to use Estonia as a test case because there's a good percentage of Russians who live in Estonia. But he kind of backed off on that because I think the West was talking tough. But no, he considers this area, all these former republics in Russia, as the near abroad. And he says, as far as he's concerned, hands off, sort of like a Monroe Doctrine.
Sue, question?
No, anybody in the audience here have a question?
Yeah, I noticed you had a experience in Albania in your list. Again, it's just something I've read that when Russia and the communist system apparently just died out more or less, Albania was the last holdout, even after Russia softened somewhat toward the west. That Albania was the last real old line
Right.
communist party with the knocks on the door and the secret police and
Right.
is that true?
Yes, yes. It was the last. It was the last of the domino, as they said, to fall.
Yeah.
And that's because of the staunchly Stalinist system, and because of that stranglehold the government had, because there was no real dissident movement. It was the only East European communist country that didn't have a real dissident movement. There was no opposition. And so after all of Eastern Europe had gone, and after the economy was falling apart, the Albanians in December of 1990 rose up. In fact, I happened to, just by chance, I was there for a conference in December, and I saw the demonstrations and how the whole thing just kind of gradually collapsed.
Might note that Nick is of Albanian ancestry.
Yes, heritage.
Heritage, excuse me. That's heritage.
And, well, it's ancestry too.
What, let's bring the Trump administration in here a little bit. Did Trump, if there was some kind of cooperation, first of all, was Trump aware of Russian interference in the election in 2016? Maybe not personally, but did the leadership of the Trump movement, were they aware of this?
Certainly people around Trump knew what was going on, and certainly there were efforts, made to kind of enlist the Russians. When this Steele dossier was being peddled, people knew what was in that, document, and that there had been attempts, by certain members of the Trump campaign. A number of these people were, convicted of lying to the Mueller Commission because they were not straightforward with, what they were up to and some of these connections with the Russians.
You're referring to the Michael Steele dossier, the disclosure.
Right, right.
And Michael Steele had been.
I don't know if Michael's his name or
Secret
not.
Service?
No, Michael, I think it's Michael Steele, former Republican chair.
Yeah, okay.
But it is Steele, and I can't think of his first name.
He had worked for the British Secret Service at one time?
Yeah, he had worked for MI6, and he was a reputable Russian analyst. And then he formed an organization known as Orvis. And that was the group that Fusion Plus there consulted.
And Donald Trump gets involved in Ukraine fairly late in his presidency. Did he do that at the behest of anybody, or did he just blunder into that?
As far as and again, I may be wrong because my information may not be accurate. I think he kind of blundered into it. But again, I won't swear to that because I don't know all of the ins and outs. How all of a sudden he became so enamored of putting this pressure on the Ukrainian government. But all of his people, Giuliani and all these others were all running around there, getting involved in this thing.
What is it that really interests Putin in Ukraine? Is it the fact that it's a major food source, or it's a huge swath of territory right in the heart of Russia? But does he just really want Crimea? What?
What he's upset about is that it is part of the near abroad. This is off-limits territory to the United States, to Western Europe, et cetera, et cetera. You don't tread on me, you're treading on me now. Get the blazes out. Now, they also have good trade. Now, there's a difference between the Ukraine, the Donbass area, that's also an important area economically for the Ukraine. It's going to be difficult for Ukraine to survive without the Donbass for a long time. Crimea is a little different. Crimea was part of the Russian Republic until Nikita Khrushchev, when he was first secretary, gave it to the Ukraine. I mean, after all, he was a Ukrainian. I did some discussion. Russians were ticked off when that was done a long time ago. Then that area, when you look at it, those are mostly, the population of Crimea is mostly Russian.
And it's a major.
Well, the Russians already had a lease from the Ukrainian government for Sevastopol.
If Ukraine does not have the Crimea, they don't have access to the sea anywhere, do they? I'm trying to think. Crimea controls the Black Sea, does it not?
Yeah, the naval base there, but I'm trying to think of with my map.
Well, there's a map, keep changing it.
Do it the easy way.
Yeah, I think the Black Sea, Ukraine. Yeah, you may try to think there. It looks.
So right now.
Yeah, they have access.
But the Russians control the Black Sea, do they not now?
Well, the Russian Navy is very active in the Black Sea. The Russians are building up their Navy very rapidly.
Is the Russian Navy, as it's being built up, is it intended to be a threat to the United States or to be another example of Russia's growing power?
It's an example. It's an example of Russia's growing power, and it makes Russia a naval force to be reckoned with in the Mediterranean.
Why the Mediterranean? Why is that so crucial to them? Russian traditional.
Well, because Middle East. I mean, they have the Syrian base. I mean, they keep an eye on that situation. Turkey occasionally has been a pain in the neck to Russia. Right now, they're kind of getting on. It gives Russia just a little bit of leverage.
So it's worth that leverage to intervene in the Syrian civil war.
Well, it's also worth that leverage to be a counterweight to the United States. If the United States, whatever it is, the Sixth Fleet that's in the Mediterranean, so it helps them vis-a-vis the United States also.
Aren't they doing a lot up in the Arctic Circle, in the northern shores of Russia?
Oh yeah.
They have something like, I don't know, like 15 icebreakers that are all nuclear powered up in that area, stationed in that area.
Right.
Is that for the oil?
That's well. There's reputedly oil up there. I mean, I'm not sure of the extent of the Russian involvement in the exploration and exploitation of oil.
Who are the major customers for Russia's oil and natural gas? Western Europe?
Well, Western Europe gets the natural gas. The Chinese buy an awful lot of the Russian oil.
So that is the major source of Russia's.
Well, as I say,
Foreign income.
Yeah, 60. And see, when the price of oil was down for a while in the 90s, in the early part of the first decade of the 2000s, the Russian economy really suffered.
Now, is there a correlation between the status of the Russian economy and the relative comfort Russians have with the government they have now? For example, when the economy is good, Putin has an easier time. When the economy sours, he's more under threat.
Yes, yeah.
Do the Russians, as now, have an outlet to express that, successfully express that disquiet? I mean, is there enough freedom of the press or freedom of assemblage in Russia for people who actually protest
Well-
meaningfully?
Well, they can protest, whether it's meaningful, and if they cross the line, it's going to be a problem.
Is there still a secret police in Russia?
Oh, sure.
Are these mostly people who were KGB at one time, and their descendants, or are these Putin redone?
Well, I mean, they've changed the names and they've changed the functions. They have the SVG, which is deals mainly with external espionage, and then they have the FSB, which is the real domestic surveillance operation. They've also beefed up municipal police.
I've read somewhere, and I'm going to pause for a question in a minute too. A long time ago, some people traveling in Russia and Siberia got off the train for a day or two, you can do that. They came across small towns where the people in charge were still communists. That there was still a local level of kind of communist operationists running small towns and out-of-the-way places in Siberia and other parts of Russia. I mean, is that simply part of the fact that the place is so big that it's hard to impose change all at one time? Or was this just happenstance?
No, I mean, as I said, Russia is such a vast country that as long as these people run the village or the town and don't give the central authorities any kind of problem, what harm can they do? That's the, it's sort of a live and let live. When Putin especially gets upset, it's when somebody is interfering with what he considers to be important state business.
So, yeah, a related question, along the lines of censorship. Are the ordinary Russians informed about activists like Navalny, or are they completely censored?
Oh, no, they know what's going on.
There's a free press in Russia?
Well, they watch TV, they radio, I mean, they can get that information from any number of sources.
So, but I mean, is like a state-run television system in Russia competing with a privately run?
Well, yeah, there's a state run and then there's a privately run, but a lot of the communications media, be they radio, TV, or newspapers, a lot of them are controlled by businessmen. And these businessmen are beholden to Putin. And the other thing is, newspapermen, journalists, I should say, journalists in Russia, of all kinds, they practice self-censorship. I mean, they know, if I want to keep working, I can go this far in reporting the story, and I will not go beyond that, point. He gets coverage, he's back, he's been arrested. After all, he's being charged, he's being charged again for these crimes. So, where we have the police beat or something like that.
Anything else, Sue?
Anybody here?
Okay. Let's go on to some of the list of questions we talked about before. Russia a great power?
That's debatable. It's a great power. No question about that. I thought you might say superpower. There's a difference between a superpower and a great power. Russia is clearly a great power. It's a dominant regional power. The question is it a superpower? Now,
okay, are we a superpower? Is that the one? The United States? The
United States is a superpower. The big discussion is, are we living in a unipolar world, or are we living in a bipolar, perhaps a multipolar world? Russia has land. It has trained population. It has a growing and efficient army with some impressive new weapon systems like these
Hypersonic.
New weapons there. What do they call those? They have a
Hypersonic.
velocity of 15,000, supposedly
Yeah.
15,000 miles an hour. So, I mean, they're developing some very sophisticated weapon system. They've cut down the size of their army, but they've made it much more efficient. And they're training and they're planning facilities. I mean, everything is being modernized, and Russia is becoming very, very effective in how it can throw its military around. They, as of now, they're not really ready, you know, to take on the United States. Not that they would want to, but they when Russia speaks, you know, people listen.
So if the Russians are building up their military,
And their economy too.
okay, their economy is better than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago?
Well, their economy, it depends. Right now with the price of oil going back up again, yeah, their economy, it fluctuates.
More than ours?
Yeah,
Okay, because it's tied up so much with natural gas and oil.
right.
The Russians export anything, are they selling military equipment?
Yep. And they also sell, they have minerals, so they sell a variety of those.
Is the Russian government under Putin more efficient than it was, say, in the last 20 years of the Soviet Union?
Oh, definitely. I mean, under Gorbachev, the government was very inefficient. In fact, going back to the 1970s, going back to the last years of Brezhnev, Brezhnev was in power from 64 to 82.
He succeeded Khrushchev, right?
Yes, after they ousted Khrushchev. And things were going well the first part of the Brezhnev regime. But then, you know, things just started to, you had a lot of this entrenched bureaucracy, some of the reforms, you know, that had been introduced, giving plant managers, giving workers a greater freedom in planning, putting competent people in positions of leadership. All of that started to go by. You had an old guard emerging. Brezhnev was becoming, you know, less and less attentive to his duties. And as a consequence of this, the regime began to stagnate. And then you had Andropov come in, who was very, would have been good. I mean, he was a bright guy, unfortunately had kidney disease. He didn't, he couldn't be in power. He was a KGB person, but he was also an efficient bureaucrat. He might have been able to turn the system around. He would have clamped down. And then after he passed away, they had Chernenko, who was ill. He was, you know, in his 70s. He only lasted a year. And it was against that background in 85 that Gorbachev comes in. And then he hits upon this idea of perestroika. You know, we'll try all of these new techniques, these new Western-style management planning and administrative concept. We'll put those into effect, and we'll do some other things. And then Glasnost, you know, we'll open everything up. We'll have mass discussion. We'll get people involved in the system. Well, that turned out to be a disaster.
And so now then you have a period of
Then you have that period, you know,
volatility.
and which leads to the breakdown of the Soviet Union and the emergence of Yeltsin.
Let me go back a second. I agree with you. You think that one of the major goals of Putin is to create disorder and disarray among his opponents, the Western democracies. What's the end game, though? What does he think is going to happen? We're going to fall, or we're going to become more like?
Which is not going to bother him.
So it's a short-term kind of thing.
And if he has, you know, he wants to interfere in Syria, if he wants to become more actively involved in, you know, Yemen or someplace like wherever he might even take on Saudi Arabia. Now, we might draw the line there. But, you know, he can move in, you know, various parts of the Middle East or, you know, open up new markets. You never know, but what they want is they want to be able to pursue their own interests.
Their own interest in Ukraine or what? Control of Ukraine or domination of? They want to take over the Ukrainian government, or they just want to dominate?
No. They're not interested in re-annexing the Ukraine. I think that might be rather traumatic, and then that might cause
Everything.
problems, yeah. So no, they just want to be dominating that government. There's a little state of Moldova, which is northern Romania, which was part of Bessarabia. There's a little area known as Transnistria. Putin supported a separatist movement in Transnistria, and, you know, he's done little things like that. Now he's upset because Moldova just had elections earlier this year, and they elected a very dynamic young lady as prime minister who wants to pursue a line independent of Russia. The question is, you know, how long is he going to let this go? I mean, he's interested in, you know, having greater influence in Serbia, in, you know, Montenegro. This idea of, you know, pan-Slavism. Bulgaria has more and more, which was showing some independence, becoming more and more slavishly tied to Putin, very much like Bulgaria, you know, in the 19th century.
How much of a threat is China to Putin?
Putin, I think very interestingly, he is willing to play with China. In fact, 2018, there were the big military maneuvers in Siberia, the Vostok, very elaborate operation. So he is cooperating with China. He is supplying the Chinese with some advanced military technology. But at the same time, and, you know, he's working with them in a variety of ways. And you know, China is one of their big oil markets. But at the same time, I think Putin sees himself sort of like England in the 19th century. As China becomes more and more dominant, a powerful nation, I think he may be looking maybe more closely to realigning with Western Europe or even the United States to serve as a counterweight to China. And he would be Russia would be a very strong part of an anti-Chinese coalition.
You know, the way you describe this reminds me of 19th century European power politics.
Right.
The 2 centuries late, I mean, the balance of power, one gets too strong, you align with somebody else there. So in that sense, Putin is very much a Europeanist, isn't he? I mean, the tradition that way.
Well, he is a practitioner of power politics. And Russia, again, the national interest of Russia, that's paramount. Is it in Russia's interest to see a very strong China, or do we want to sort of rein China in and cooperate with Western Europe or United States or what have you?
Putin's kind of fortunate in that he doesn't have the burden of communist ideology to support in his efforts. I mean, he's not trying to export a revolution in some place. That didn't work very well. So it's purely Russian nationalism that we're looking at here.
Right.
Did they interfere in the 2020 election?
Who?
Russians.
In the United States?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay, why didn't it work?
Well, the last time, I mean, you had other factors. Remember last time, they were also a little annoyed at Hillary Clinton. They definitely did not want her under any circumstances because she had been very critical of the Russians, especially around 2011, when these popular demonstrations were pretty widespread in the country. This time, again, I don't know. There were a lot of people who were disaffected, you know, with Trump himself. So again, I don't know why the effect was not as strong, or else did they?
We were aware of it too. I mean, more people were aware of it, so there was more alert about it.
Yeah, but again, they were supporting not all of the Trump candidates. They were involved creating this propaganda. What they wanted in this election more than Trump was to create discord in the United States. That's the big thing. And they did. They succeeded. They played, you know, both sides. They got everybody angry. I think some of these Trump people who were protesting the election, they were being inspired, I think, by some of these website, none of the, I don't do all that social media, but, some of these sites.
Fake news things. and-
Yeah, fake news
Do you
stuff.
think Putin ever viewed Trump as an ally? Or as a means?
I think he was more a means. I don't think he respected Trump.
Do you think Trump saw Putin as an ally?
I think he saw him as somebody he would not want to be at odds with, but he did take some hardline stance against Russia. He did not want to unduly alienate him, but at the same time, he was very critical. Now, on some things, I don't understand why he did not react very strongly to the cyber break into the security systems. Now, it may have been that he was licking his wounds and he was, upset, but I'm not exactly sure. But, these relationships are so complex because the Russians are playing several sides. What they want is, and we're sort of at that state now. And that, we talk about the United States being a great power. One of the sources of our power is we have a very stable democratic system. We have confidence, in our institutions. Well, they're undermining that confidence in our institutions. That is weakening us in the international arena. We are a superpower, we're maybe even a mega superpower, but our situation is deteriorating.
Question, Sue?
A comment, yep. Sorry, get to it here. I was surprised at how prosperous St. Petersburg and the surrounding area is. Is it an anomaly or is that typical?
No, there are urban areas, in various parts of Russia that are, prospering, especially as you move away from in the center city, people with money, it's sort of like center cities in the United States. People buy property, they spruce up their apartments or their buildings, but they're also building now in outlying areas of cities, and those areas are prospering, so long as the oil flows.
We've already established that there's possibility there's oil in the Arctic. That's one of the reasons
There-
people are interested in it.
That could be, yeah. Well, they also want, expand sea traffic.
My impression was that Russian oil was in places like Georgia and Azerbaijan. Those are independent-
Azerbaijan has a lot of oil, they have a lot of gas, and you have oil, and
But that's not, is that still part of Russia? It's independent, isn't it?
those are independent. Some of those companies also have Russian, but yeah.
So the assets are influenced by Russian oligarchs.
No, but there are also areas, oil producing areas within the Caucasus area and all that. That's some of that is Russian air, still territory.
Is there a difference between what are called Russian oligarchs, which I presume are mega businessmen, and organized crime? Are they the one and the same? Are they melded together? Are they competing forces in the Soviet Union?
Well, I think.
Not in Russia, excuse me.
Yeah, so by and large, well, there are some who are both. As I said, some mobsters have become legitimate businessmen.
Like here.
Yes, and then there are others, who still continue with their illicit activities. And, then there is a small group of legitimate businessmen, but it's hard to be a legitimate businessman in Russia. There are a lot of people you have to pay off. Wasn't
that sort of the system in the Soviet system before anyway?
Well, you had that corruption. Only it was done within the structure of communism. Factory managers had certain quotas to fill, so they would bribe suppliers of raw materials to give it to them at a, they'd pay them a little more, and they would get the material. They'd be able to finish out their requirements under the 5-year plan. That system was known as the BLAT system, B-L-A-T system in the Soviet Union. And yeah, there was all kinds of corruption. You paid off officials. You wanted, some more ration coupons. You pay people off.
I've always been a fan of Russian culture. I don't read Russian. I've only read Russian literature and translation. When I first got interested in classical music, with Russian classical music, Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Prokofiev, people like that.
Well, Prokofiev did the theme for the music for Alexander Nevsky.
Yes, he did. And that is striking kind of music. I mean, it's just impressive. Maybe was that 39, 38, 39, 40?
Yeah, 38, I think.
I mean, I've always been interested too in the Russian religion. I'm guessing that under the czars, Eastern Orthodox Christianity was one of the solidifying forces. It was diminished during the Soviet period. Is it back now?
Oh, it was revived partly during the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. The Patriarchate of Moscow had been dissolved in the 1920s, late 20s. It was revived in 43. The church struggled along. Now, earlier I had mentioned that when I think of this Putin, I think of the official nationality. Nationalism, which Putin fosters, autocracy, which is his democratic absolutism, whatever you want to call it. And the third leg is orthodoxy. Putin has done a lot with the church. A lot of oligarch money has gone into the church at Putin's behest. And the church now at schools, I would say 20 to 25% of the people are Orthodox in religion. And so it's an important part of his regime. I don't know if you remember in 2012, there was a group called Pussy Riot, a Russian rock group. They went into the cathedral in Moscow, the Cathedral of Risen Christ, and they put on a rather raucous satirical program criticizing both the church and Putin. And Putin, of course, they clamped down on him. They did 2 years. So he is protecting the church, and he is promoting the church, and he is also using the church to advance Russian interests in the Orthodox countries of the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, to a lesser extent Romania. But so the church is prospering at the hands of the Russians, and tying it with the armed forces. In 2017, there was a new cathedral, that beautiful cathedral on the outskirts of Moscow. The cathedral, the church, the official church of the Russian armed forces. And again, if you can track that down online, a very impressive consecration ceremony for that church. And Putin is there, and all the military and parades and everything. I mean, so there is this this tie. So Putin does use, and they're using the church to enforce Putin's morality standards. You know, attacking homosexuality, attacking all kinds of what they would call liberal sexual attitudes, trying to enforce morality. You know, divorce is bad and stuff. You know, so the church is being used, and Putin consider those virtues that he's trying to promote as being important for a stable society in Russia.
Any other questions, Sue?
No,
Okay,
one more.
let's think about closing with this one. Let's suppose you are top advisor to Joe Biden, and you're national security, foreign policy advisor. What advice would you give Joe Biden about dealing with Putin in Russia?
Well, I would say, first of all, you need to approach issues that we feel can be handled. For example, START treaty, that would be a first thing. Begin working to see if we can get some kind of an understanding on that. Deal with matters, you know, relating to human rights in Russia. Not pushing that very hard, but you know, making it very clear we are, you know, interested in that. Making it very clear to Russia that we have no desire to topple the regime in the Ukraine. We do want to see reforms. We want good government in Ukraine, which has been notoriously corrupt, but we, you know, really have no desire to change the regime. we're willing to cooperate to combat terrorism. So, it would be issues of this kind. Human rights, I think you might raise the issue, but I think that, as I think more about it, with what is going on in the country now, we probably need to keep away from human rights issues.
So is there an indication that Putin's interested in dealing with us on those issues?
He might be. It just depends on, he may want to, I think he will deal with us on START.
Which is strategic arms?
Yeah, that I am, pretty sure he will deal with. I'm not sure, what we can do in terms of a trade. We have some trade with Russia, but not that significant. So we need to take it, rather slowly, and, he needs to say, look, I want an honest relationship with Russia. I'm not here to play you for anything. We have some interest in preserving peace. We need to cooperate in areas such as scientific research for, COVID treatment and prevention. There are some of these humanitarian areas where we might cooperate. So I think those would be the initial steps. But I think all of this too shouldn't start, with high-level negotiations the way Trump did. I mean, you begin them with your ambassador, and then you move into the Department of State and see what kind of results you get.
So if we're going to name a new ambassador, we need somebody who's a professional.
We should.
Not a crony, but somebody who maybe knows Russian.
Oh, yeah.
Knows Russian history.
Well, again, Rex Tillerson, of course, was picked as our first Secretary of State because he had dealt with Russia as being president of Exxon. Well, Tillerson really didn't have not much knowledge, and what was damning about him was he cleaned the State Department, he cleaned out some of these Russian experts. And this is why, and then Trump could never take expert advice. One of the things we know about Putin is he reads his intelligence briefs every morning. I mean, they're brought to him and he has them from 4 agencies and he reads them, religiously. Well, I would assume Biden is going to be doing this, have a little better understanding of the realities of the situation.
Biden had been chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, had he not?
Right, and Finken had been the director of staff of that committee, so he feels comfortable with him as Secretary of State.
Sue, I think we've just about filled our time up. Nichols, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Time goes fast. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thanks.
Thanks.
So just to wrap it up and tell you what's coming up, we've got Julie.
Julia Baracine is a colleague in the Department of Political Science, and she is going to be, in 2 weeks, we're going to be discussing Latino immigration into the United States. She is an expert. She has a couple of books on the subject. She herself is Latina. She's Argentinian. She's done a lot of interviews, kind of surveying kind of information. So we're going to look at the broad spectrum of Latino immigration within the context of the history of immigration to the United States.
And close to home.
And close to home.
Yeah.
Because one of her books deals with Monmouth and Beardstown.
Yeah, that should be really interesting. So that's going to be on February 3rd, 7 o'clock here. And hopefully we could have a few people in-house, limited, and then online. And then we got Rick
Hardy
back
on the 17th.
scheduled.
That's a postponed one from before Christmas. We'll be talking about the Supreme Court.
Yes, that should be really interesting as well. All right, and then one other thing to save the date for our annual meeting of members, which will be on February 11th at 7 o'clock. So stay tuned, lots of good things happening here at the museum and on Our Front Porch, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
And
you for
Thank you, you're welcome.
Signing off, see you next time.
Dodge the bullet again, Nicholas.
Okay.